Hey guys, welcome back to Kerbal Space Program Nitro. Well, in this video I wanted to go over my Leviathan lifter designs and also the slack tank asparagus staging that I've been using with it. So if you saw my other video, you saw the Leviathan Supermax lifter that lifts 200 tons or over. It has lifted 250 tons, but then you start running into structural issues, and I'll talk about those more here, as long as we have enough clearance. Looks like we do. Flip that up a little bit. Alright, so this is essentially the lifter in action. You can replace these top nose cones here with anything that you choose. It's not really important what you have on the top of here, but less drag is always helpful. And then let's just take this thing apart so you guys can sort of see it piece by piece. I'm not actually going to pull the parts off of it, but I'll show you guys what's going on here. So underneath everything, you're going to start out with your large decoupler that's going to go here, and then your payload, whatever that payload may be, goes on top of it. This, of course, is not a suitable payload, but we're not launching a payload in this video. I just wanted to show you guys the overall lifter technology and how to set it up yourself in case you're wondering. So after that, you have a SAS unit and then a battery to power everything. You don't really need a battery this large if you don't want to. You could always just stick a thermoelectric generator on here or whatever. But usually when you attach payloads onto the top of this thing, you don't have enough room because some of the things might clip into some of these other nose cones or something like that. So the taller it is, the better, because you can always strut it together from the outsides. So let's talk about that. Whenever you have a payload on top of one of these lifters, you want to take your struts on the outside for however many points you can connect it to on your payload and just do that. And that's pretty much all you need to do. Any payload that you have on here, of course, is going to have a much different layout than just a circular pod like this, so you're going to have to strut it together the best way you can, but always strut it from the innermost tanks first, because these are going to be the last ones to go, so you'll maintain your structural integrity throughout the whole thing. Don't ever strut anything to these outer tanks, because these drop first. So that's just general struts. Of course, with these, what are these things called? The brand adapter. You have a lot more surface area on the bottom of it, and I think these have less drag. It's about the same drag. That's okay. But you get about the same surface area as you would on the regular top of one of these fuel tanks, and that gives you a whole lot more area to work with when you're strutting things together. So I generally like this design a little bit more. On the inside here, going on next to this first tank, if you can see it underneath, there is a 1500 power Rocket Max engine under here, and these are all 215 power regular engines that I've strutted to here. The center tank actually fuels these outer 8, so that way even after this one runs out, you still get about the same amount of power. Actually, you get a little bit more power because 8 times 2 is 16, so whatever 8 times 215 is, so what, 6? It's a big number. I think it's over 3,000. Or not over 3,000, but I don't know. It's big. More than one of these main stall engines. So I figured that maintaining the power of all of these for longer is a lot better solution than just one on the center. So since the center one fuels all these outer 8, they all run off their own separate fuel supply after the center one runs out, so you don't asparagus any of these. So all these will run out at the same time. What does get asparagus is everything on the outside of that. So if you want to start and set up one of these, you would grab your fuel tank, grab your rocket engine that you want to put on there. So if we want to do this on the top of this thing, you would grab one of these, and then you can grab one of these, stick it on there like that, and then you have your 8 engines, and then your fuel line. It's transferred like that. And that's all there is to it, and that's the center engine stall right there. And then if you wanted even more power out of this, you could by attaching the Mark 55 radial engines. So there, you just boosted the power of the entire center stage for a heavier payload without like any work. And you could even double up on these. You could have 2 per tank if you wanted to, and give your rocket even more power. But if you do that, I would usually go with one of these larger jumbo fuel tanks, because that'll give you more power anyways. Alright. So after you have that, you want to set up the outer struts here, and what's going on there is pretty simple. It's just one of these radial attachment points, and then depending on how far away this is from the craft, that'll determine what you actually put on there. So you don't want this to hit anything when these decouple, and as you can see here, it might not look like it, but there is enough clearance between this this decoupler up here, and when it falls, it's just going to fall straight down. It's not going to impact any of these tanks, so we don't have to worry about any explosions or anything like that. And so if you want to set up one of these, you just have to grab something that fits on it. Let's see. There we go. Not the best way to stick it on there, but whatever. Let's put a new one on actually at the proper location. Alright, so you have a couple different options when you're doing stuff like this. You don't always have to use this girder adapter that I was using. You can always use one of these FL adapters. Any adapter really will work. So you can put that one on there, and then you can also put one of these smaller decouplers on there like that. If you have a smaller craft, that's probably the best option to go with. But for a large vessel like this, where we have lots of room, I want to go with one of these. And you could still attach a small decoupler on there if we wanted to, but we have a little bit larger endpoint that we have to work with. So after you attach that adapter, grab your decoupler, and you want the arrows to be pointing in towards the ship, because what that's going to do is it's going to push all this away, and it'll push in a symmetrical order. So if one pushes here, another one will push on the other side, and that'll prevent the center craft from really moving at all. And what you do to attach your craft to this is you just grab one of these. And that's if you're attaching it to a regular fuel tank. Now if you do the inverse of this, where you have one of these and you need to attach it to a point on the ship, you can put these over any of your radial mounted docking ports as well. So if you have a docking port like this, attach it like that. And so any docking port can be attached with one of these with a drop tank on it, and as long as you apply like at least 2 to 4 struts to your center craft, it'll stay on there throughout the whole flight, and then you get the same benefit as you do if you were to set it up like this instead. So depending on what attachment points you already have on your craft, you may have more options as far as putting even more rockets on it, so always keep that in mind. But that's just pretty much how you set up the structural points of it. Now if we want to do the asparagus staging itself, what's going on here is, since this is 8 times symmetry, we have 2 different options that I like to do. I like to work with a perfect, what do you call it, perfect cross that goes right through the center of the ship. So if we have this as the front, back, and then left and right, I don't usually go with the diagonal angles. And so what I mean by that is these 2 on the outer most sections here are going to be the last ones to drop, and we're going to maintain that dual symmetry throughout all of the detachment points. If you've done asparagus staging, you know what I'm talking about already. You drop 2 at a time and you maintain symmetry over the whole process, yada yada yada. But here, just when you set it up this outer one is the last one to drop, so it feeds into the center, and then this outer one on the opposite side is the other last one to drop, so it feeds into the center too. And you can see that by these fuel lines right here that have attached. And now we have regular asparagus, so this one feeds that one, this one feeds the other one, and this one feeds that one. Now when we get to the outside, the drop tank feeds in there, but now we just go around the opposite direction. And so we loop back around to the beginning, and then we arrive at this one. So this one's going to drop first, then second, then third, then fourth, and then we're onto our regular asparagus staging. Now depending on the power of rockets that you have on here, you can have drop tanks be on top of each other, you can have them be side by side, you can have dual sets of them, you can have smaller tanks, you can use any configuration of tanks on the outside that you want, and you'll get the same effect. So another option to do is if you had two of these stacked, you could do something like this. So we can have a tank there, and then we can also put a smaller tank on the outside like that. And then for our propulsion system, we would have this one feeding into that one, and the small tank feeds that fuel into the big tank. And so you can have double the amount of fuel on here, but now your bottom ones will drop first, and you can just go around the chain in the same way. So you don't have to necessarily go out in order to get the same effect as what we have here. You just have to go down. And of course, since all of these are going to be below our engines, we don't have to worry about these knocking into the engines or causing any explosions or anything, because they're just already going to fall below the craft. So that's another option that you have when you set something like this up. Just so you guys know, a lot of different configurations that you can play with when it comes to drop tank asparagus. So let's see, those are now in the wrong section. Alright, so now when setting this up, you'll probably notice something a little weird here. These are decouplers, but where's our engines? Well, the decouplers are underneath our engines. So what I did here is I just put a regular decoupler and attached it the way it regularly is here. But what's going on is they're attached to a big piece of steel on the bottom of the structural panel. And so that way these docking clamps are able to support the weight of all of these engines here, and then we also have the weight of these outer tanks supported as well. So that'll prevent any structural failures from when this thing loads onto the launch pad, because that's another thing you want to watch out for. On the larger model, I use a wider girder, and that gives me more space on the inside. As you can see, if we still wanted to attach even more, we could do it like that, but now one of these fuel lines is probably going to intersect one of these docking clamps, and that'll blow it off whenever we go to launch our craft, so you don't ever want to have that happen. When you set up the staging for this, you always want the ones attached to structural panels to be on their own separate stage layer, because these are going to hold the plates in place, and what's actually going to undock is all of these decouplers. So you want the decouplers on the first stage, and then you want the docking clamps on the next stage that are holding the decouplers in place. All the other docking clamps are going to be on your first stage. And then as the craft launches, you drop it 2 by 2 by 2 by 2, as you can see in here, all the way up to the top, where you decouple your last one, and then your payload's in orbit. And that's really all there is to it, and now I'll just do a test launch for you guys here just so you can see everything in action. When you go to launch this, you will have to right click on each tank on the outside because it doesn't have an engine attached to the bottom of it, so that way you know when to drop them. And these are going to go really quickly since we have a lot of fuel that's being used on the inside. These are going to drop relatively fast, but because we don't have any payload on here, basically, this thing's going to get up into space really quickly, so we won't have to worry about any problems. But let's take a quick look on all the way that I strutted this thing together, the way the asparagus is set up. You'll notice on the bottom I have kind of a crisscross strut going on here, so they attached it to the other tanks. Just make sure everything that you do is strutted together properly with enough duct tape, otherwise it'll come apart. Because these tanks that the rockets are lifting are really light compared to what you probably are used to. But that's it, so let's go ahead and go out to the launch pad. Should mention right away that one risk that we do have, since I don't have the payload actually secured to anything, is that this might be enough power to actually blow the docking clamp off the bottom of the little capsule there that Jeb's in. So he may or may not survive this. We will see. So although it was spinning pretty wildly there, that's because we didn't actually have a payload on it with its own SAS system. The SAS on here can only do so much. Just to give you an idea of what has happened here, that's propelling little Jeb and his pod all the way out to Joule's orbit. So it's a little bit much for just one pod. Of course, we wouldn't use this for just one capsule. We would use this for a heavy payload. So for something like this, I'd say 150 tons, probably easily that thing could lift up into orbit, give or take. Just from rough estimates, because the lighter the actual lifter itself is, the more power it's going to have compared to the payload it's lifting, because it's not using all of its power to lift its own fuel. So one thing I do like to do actually to stop spin like that is you can go into the control section and just put an SAS module on everything. And so now this should maintain stability a lot better if you use a solution like this than just not having any SAS at all, because it will tend to spin as you drop 2x2, and if you've done asparagus, you probably have that issue anyway. But with this configuration here, it'll be a lot more stable. Although this is excessive, of course, for SAS units, the center part has more than enough power to handle all of them. So you don't even really have to add another battery to this thing. It's good to go as is right here. So this is what I would recommend for your nose cones on your essential asparagus staging. Again, you want to put all of this stuff on the innermost layer because this is the last part to drop. And if we wanted to get more fuel out of this thing, we easily could. We don't have to use these tanks here. We could always drop them down below, or we could even use the heavier tanks and we'll get the same result. So we have plenty of power. This isn't the maximum amount of power we can get out of the system too, keep that in mind. So the further out you go, the more you're able to add onto something like this. So we could actually use what we have for the center as all of our outer pieces, and then we could do what I recommended with the radial engines on the center. Because you always want to make sure that the center has more power than the outer ones, otherwise the outer ones are going to lift off by themselves and the center is going to stay put. Or we could have potential structural failure. So just keep all that stuff in mind when you're using lifter designs like this. Hope this helps you guys build Supermax lifters that can lift heavy payloads. If you watch the other video, I do believe I launched my Papa Dragon ship up into orbit, which I'll just load it in here for you so you can see for the last one. I think I even swapped it out on my Cobra Mark V, but just to show. Alright, so this is the Papa Dragon ship loaded onto my other Leviathan lifter. I don't have anything attached to the tops of these, which usually I do. I would recommend either a nose cone or something. Depending on how you guys feel about your drag and what you want to put on top of drop tanks. This isn't a whole lot of mass. These structural brand adapters here have a total mass of 0.1, and with one of these it's 0.03. If we just had one of these things like this weighs more than that, because this is 0.4. So we have a 0.13 is what this weighs, and then these weigh 0.4. So definitely 3 times heavier by just going with one of these, and I think drag. Yeah, so you probably get the same amount of drag out of them too. Not sure. But this is just what I usually like to do for the tops of these things. I don't have it loaded in there for the one that you guys download. One thing to also keep in mind with the taller versions of this thing, you want more struts on the bottom going to your center tank because they are further out. When you load in heavier payloads on here, the bottom will want to rip off of the center, so the more you strut that down, the better it's going to be. But this is perfectly stable now, so this works well. And here you can see that there's enough clearance on the inside of these larger girders to allow for all of these extra docking clamps, which is what I was talking about before. So although these are a lot of struts going in here to this thing, it does hold together really well. This is generally how you're going to want to strut something like this together to a lifter like this design. On the center here, I did wind up strutting a lot of these tanks to themselves because these are huge forces that you're dealing with here. And these things lift off, so they like to rip themselves apart, so make sure you use enough struts. Even on the decoupler itself, I put struts to everything because that's resting on top of a docking port. So docking ports have a mind of their own when it comes to how much they're willing to rest on something. But that's a design. Also, you can see I did have the SAS units on the outside of all of these other inner tanks. Just like I said before, that comes standard. This is probably too much battery power, but I don't have a battery unit on the center. And with taller rockets, if you put a SAS unit on the center, the whole center section will shake. So don't do that. But here you can see that these are all drop tanks. And since we're out further away, we have more room to play with here, so you can actually put double tanks on each one of these single ones that come out from the center. So that's how all that works. That's the drop tank asparagus staging in action in my Leviathan lifters. I am working on making smaller versions of these using these smaller 215 engines, so these guys. And hopefully I come up with some cool stuff on that so I can reduce the part count, reduce size, but still get the same amount of power. And of course, these are more efficient than the main stalls, so we'll see what happens. No promises with that yet, but should be cool. You can also use the same slack tank staging design on your transfer stages, so if you have nuclear engines and stuff like that, you can drop off slack tanks of those as you travel out to distant planets like Jewel and such. It does work very well in that configuration also, so don't just use this on lifter stages, you can actually use this on everything. So lifters, landers, transfer stages, has lots of applications. So again, I hope you guys found this helpful, and take care.